I'm never going to question whether this is art. If someone is having like tears well up, frankly, I've spent more time hand illustrating in the last month than I've had in my entire late 20s. There's so many components to how AI functions in an actual practical workflow. It really needs a human being. The world was like kind of coming down around me. It was a tough time. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I must have seen an article about generative AI. And I was like,
Oh,
I just want to make something. I've always really loved the Lina Claire Belgian school style of Western comic. Just because I don't generate the final piece doesn't mean that they don't exist as like an
mm,
artistic piece of work. I have a background not just in illustration, but also in theater art. So by 2022, we were like, how do we pivot? What do we pivot to? And that was when we really started getting into generative AI. The biggest takeaway that I have from is art is defined by the person who created it or was a part of the creative process. So actually, it's sort of funny. Generative AI has given me the opportunity to talk about things that like I've never really talked about, but have been a huge part of my artistic journey.
welcome to Intelliverse. This is the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of generative AI. And I'm your host, Heather Cooper. And today we're talking to the founder and creative director of Promptcrafted, Araminta, or Mint, as I've come to know her. And Mint is a generative illustrator, storyteller, and workflow explorer. Mint, welcome to Intelliverse.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Mint has an extensive background in art and generative AI. And she has profiles on LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, Hugging Face. She writes a lot of articles that are very helpful resources. She has models on Replicate and Patreon, and Promptcrafted is her business that she is recently branched off into. And I'm so excited to hear about that. But today we're going to learn about Mint's background and journey to becoming an expert in generative creativity and workflow optimization. So,
Yeah.
what just to talk about your early career because you're an artist, an illustrator. So, what first drew you to the world of art?
Yeah, so it's a really roundabout story. I actually went to school for theater directing and design, and that's when I started to get into illustration. Was actually for classes and work that I had to do in theater. So for a long time, illustration was like a secondary passion, but I was very much immersed in the art world and the theater world. After school, which sounds like a decade ago, after school, I've done so many like mini careers. A lot of them have been intersectional in art, whether it was design back in like the early, I guess it would be the mid 2000s, 2010, 2011. I was doing like a lot of website design back then, like WordPress and that sort of thing. I did a stint as a food writer around that time as well,
Oh,
because I have
that's
my
cool.
my dad was an editor and a writer, so I have a background in writing and editing as well. And
Oh, cool.
um, yeah, so I got my hands pretty deep. It was like a small food magazine, so I got my hands pretty deep into the photo side of that. So I had a little bit of a photo period of time. And then a lot, of course, for any creative, a lot of working in restaurants as well.
Well,
Um,
I could share
and
that.
yeah, and then in 2020, obviously the world shut down.
Mm.
And I actually started my business with my business partner at that time, who's still my business partner.
Oh,
We had a boutique in Portland, Maine for a little while. That had 2 strong years, and then Portland, Maine had sort of a tough time in terms of tourism and that sort of thing. So by 2022, we were like, how do we pivot? What do we pivot to? And that was when we really started getting into generative AI.
oh, well, that is so. It's such a yeah. You covered everything very quickly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, what were like you do a lot of manga and anime. What are some of your early influences that shaped that artistic style?
Yeah, so actually it's sort of funny. Generative AI has given me the opportunity to talk about things that like I've never really talked about, but have been a huge part of my artistic journey. So I did say I got into illustration in college, but really that's not quite true. I was actually buying like how to draw manga books with my allowance back when I was 11. I would walk
Oh,
down. I lived in Northampton, Massachusetts at the time, and you could like walk to the mall from where I was. So I'd walk down this bike path to the mall and I'd go to, I think it was Borders Books. And they had like this series of books on how to draw anime and manga. And I would like go and I'd pick one out and I'd buy it. And then I just start drawing. And my drawings were terrible. They were so bad. They were like the worst drawings ever.
I
But
can't do that.
I've had like a big love of that style of drawing since I guess that would have been like 2000, 2001. I'm really dating myself here,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
It's okay. No, no,
but
you're fine.
yeah, it's been really nice because I kind of didn't go too deep into that after high school, and kind of revisiting that in my illustrations has been a great, renaissance, so to speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, when did you first become interested in generative AI or image generators, models, video or animation?
Yeah. So, generative AI in particular, I started to get into back during like Midjourney version 2 in the summer of 2022. It was right when they opened up their beta. I must have like I don't remember exactly what led me to it. I know that I was like feeling a little disparate at the time. Like the world was like kind of coming down around me. It was a tough time. I was like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do," and I must have seen an article about generative AI, and I was like,
Oh,
"I just wanna make something, and I don't want it to take a lot of time, and I'm really tired." And so I found Midjourney, and at that time, the images were not, like, amazing images. They were kind of, it was back, like, post-disco diffusion, so there was, like, this melty quality, and it was very, like, cerebral and stuff, but I loved it. I loved that you could put words in, and you'd get a picture that kind of made sense with the words.
wow.
Um and I ended up making a tarot deck, with V3 that, um, I did, like, a short run publishing with, and yeah, it was really cool. I just after that, I was all in. I kind of had spent so much time generating, at that time, and at that time also, like, there was if you generated a lot with Midjourney, you got put into these clubs, like the 2,500 or like the 10,000 club. And I got to like one of the highest, like I think it was like 25,000 or something. Something insane. I was like, I have,
Really?
yeah, I felt like I was like, I'm clearly like trying to manage other things right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it was great because a lot of the people in that club are all still in AI, and they're the people who really taught me how to use generative AI in a really interesting way. Like shout out to um some of the X Stability folks who were at that time Midjourney users and became Stability folks, helped me a lot. So yeah, for sure. It's that was the kickoff for me.
Well, how did your background in art influence your approach to Midjourney, other types of generative AI?
So I would say a few ways. I think one unique thing for me is that I have a background not just in illustration but also in theater art, which is a highly collaborative art form. You can't create theater in a vacuum, and so there was something about the collaborative process between an AI model and myself that was really interesting and felt very natural. Like I had spent all this time learning like how to talk to actors, how to talk to designers. And I don't think AI is so different conceptually. I think in, what it's able to achieve, there's some very big differences. But I think in like the type of things that you need to think about when you're collaborating on something, I think there's a lot of overlap. And so the idea that I might have to collaborate with a machine was not like this like weird thing for me. I think for a lot of artists, they work in very solo or they work in like maybe they're part of a group, but that group is they are a, like, part of a whole where their piece is very personal. I get the sense. But for me, theater art is not really owned by any one person in the production cycle, so there's not this kind of, like, really intense ownership of concepts.
Ah,
And
that's a good
so
idea.
that was very informative for me, and then from an illustration standpoint, I've always really loved, the Lina Claire Belgian school style of Western comics, which are heavily influenced by old Japanese, block prints. Similarly, actually, to anime, you can see some relationships between the 2. So artists like like Hergé, who wrote Tintin, Mobius, etcetera, like, I really loved the idea that you could start to blend concepts together to create something that wasn't any of those concepts, but something new. And that was like my understanding of particularly illustration, but like graphic novel illustration really informed a lot of like the experiments that I've done.
Oh, that's so and thank you for I hadn't thought about the collaborative part of it because we are, back and forth, the conversation we're having and we're giving some guidance and then it's giving back with the idea of how it translates that guidance and we
Yeah.
can work with it together. That's a really cool concept. And I don't think a lot of people think about it in that way, where the people who think it's just typing in words and things come up, they miss that. And even people who are heavily using the generative AI tools don't necessarily think of the relationship, the language. I love the language of AI and learning how to speak it and have a conversation with
Yeah.
these models. So that is so cool. And yeah, your art I can always spot because you have a certain flair. You have your own particular style that it's an unusual, or not necessarily unusual because we're in a place where everything is new. So we're almost define like creating a whole new space
Yeah,
basically.
I think that one thing I like to sort of put out into this space as something to reflect on if someone is an AI artist is like art always has a lineage. Doesn't really matter what art you're doing. It comes from a lineage of other art. Like that is how art has always existed. And I think you can tell when there's an intentional lineage.
Hmm.
And when someone is building on intentional like building blocks, and I think that's probably like, I hear that feedback a lot from people like, "Oh, I can spot your style, it really looks like your style," and what it says to me is that it really looks like the style that the school of art that I want to exist in. Um, and that's informed by so many artists who came before me, so I think it's really important for AI artists who want to kind of have that type of, standing out or type of, like, intention to really think about who's informing your work or what's informing your work, because if you're aware of that, it's really obvious, in your art. But if you're not aware of that, you run the risk of being informed by things that get kind of lost in the crowd.
That's a great way to look at it too, because yeah, it's a way to have your own your unique style, your unique you let your unique idea, imagination come out and be in it's not taking something else, it's building on it in this new space.
Yeah, and I would even challenge and say that there is no such thing as a unique style. I think my style is very much a derivative of so many other styles. The unique thing about any piece of art is the perspective that a person's brought to it. So I think that's what people are afraid is going to get lost in AI art a lot. I think when we hear about people being like, "Oh, I don't like AI art because of blah blah blah," usually it's because they're worried about losing that human element. But I think that's really what makes art interesting. It's maybe not always what makes art beautiful, but I don't really consume traditionally beautiful art.
Well,
Like
that's true. And the
I some of
perspective
it's beautiful, but yeah.
and with the perspective of the viewer, the audience too, right? And what they're preconceived notions that they already have about that style of art, where if they don't like manga, they are going to already kind of have an issue with what it looks like, or it kind of reminds them or whatever. So, yeah, that's a good idea too, to think about the perspective. And there's a lot of discussion and about what makes it art, and whether it is actually art if it was created with generative tools. And I don't really get into that too much. Do you? Just out of curiosity, I don't want to like put you on the
Oh,
spot, but
no, I mean, I'm totally comfortable talking about that. I went to school for art. I was taught by very, artists, people who consider themselves artists and have been confirmed by other people as being artists. And the biggest takeaway that I have from art is art is defined by the person who created it or was a part of the creative process. There's a lot of definitions of art. And in my opinion, if people are asking whether or even debating whether or not something is art, then that means it probably is art. Um, art can be problematic, art can be you can create art in unethical ways. Like there's things separate from the fact that it's art that can
yes,
be a problem. And I think that there's a lot of great conversations to be had around ethics, right? But ethics have actually never stopped something from being art. Um that there's incredibly unethical artists that are some of the most famous artists that we loud today. Salvador Dali, for example, well known for being a very abusive person. But is his art not art? There's all
yeah,
of these pieces where it's like the art world has been fraught with challenges for a very long time, but especially in the last few decades, the concept of what constitutes something as art is pretty clear cut. And it's most things that people consider to be art are art, and it really just takes one person.
and this conversation is going to continue on as
Yeah.
like with the way people view artists that have came before us and or came before all the current crop. And I think it's kind of like people seem to want to limit it somewhat to what their idea, their perspective, their frame of viewing it and saying what can and can't exist. But at least you still, it's inspiring to see that you keep pushing it, and they're not pushing it, but that you are creating, and you don't let those things hold you back from creating new things, and not being defined by a pre certain model that came before us for how to create art.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had concerns, of course, like, "Oh, is this can I really call this art?" at certain points, but, not very often, and certainly in the last few months, I've been releasing a lot of Laura models that other people can use and generate from. I consider those to be pieces of art as well. Just because I don't generate the final piece doesn't mean that they don't exist as, an
Oh,
artistic piece of work, and I feel so affirmed and validated around that because I've had people from across the world, especially there's been a great response from people in East Asia, in particular China, who've reached out to me and said, I used your model and it reminded me of my childhood. And I was
wow.
I had these memories of child I've and these were people I would have never talked to otherwise because we're so separated from each other. And that to me, I'm like, well, I'm never gonna question whether this is art. If someone is having tears well up because they're reminded of
Yes.
childhood, that's art. That's in
Wow.
yeah, being moved by something, that's art.
That's yeah, that's I was gonna that takes us to my next segment of questions about your training models. And I didn't even think about models being art themselves, but that's true because it's what you're putting into it. And I was gonna ask if you could walk us through, if you could simplify or walk through your process of training a model from scratch, and what just walk me through it, like where you start,
Yeah.
ideas.
So I sometimes I illustrate for my models. Sometimes I use illustrated data sets. Oftentimes I'm actually generating data sets synthetically. I don't really have a problem with that. Because for me, it's about the curation of those images. That's actually the part that's the most important to training is generating some images and then curating them so that you can distill a very particular style in an intentional way. So I usually have between 20 to 50 images. And then I've used Hugging Face quite a few times. Sometimes I'll use other UI or platforms to train. But generally, I'm going and I'm fine tuning what we call a LoRa model, which stands for low rank adaption. And this is basically it like sits on top of a general model. So like a model like SDXL, you can put a LoRa on top of it and it's going to guide the style. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and so then I train it and I sometimes I get it on the first time, other times it takes 2 or 3 trainings to get, like, the right settings, because the settings do shift depending on the style, but not significantly, it's like a small shift. Yeah.
Does it matter a lot with the captions and, like,
Yeah,
what do you use to help with that?
well, captions do make a big difference. Oftentimes I will auto caption. I'll use a program like Blip or Lava to auto caption. These are both like open source tools that people use. But if I'm being totally honest, I find that manually captioning for a fine tuning is the smartest way to go. Captions do make a big difference. Basically, they're the text that the model looks at next to your images, and otherwise, you can't really control how the model is interpreting the images during training. So the text, if you provide it with text as a baseline, then you have a point of reference when you're prompting in terms of like the language associated with these images, and it allows you to have a more productive conversation with the Gen AI
Mhm.
model.
Does it limit the output later if somebody does not use, the certain words within that or, like, if it like, the more specific
It
the
depends. So, like,
caption is?
I usually use a mix of different captioning styles. I usually use like a narrative, like longer sentence style, and then a style where it's like a series of just like words.
Uh,
And if you mix the captions like that, then there's not a high risk of that, because it's seen different ways of interpreting them. So, although some words might be more inclined to be related to the model, they're not always going to be. Um, but, if I'm training something that I want to be able to caption a very specific way, like let's say someone is like building an app or something and they wanted to be able to generate using the same format of prompts because they need it to be like automated,
mhm.
um, then I would just use that style of formatting because the model will pick up that pattern.
What inspired you to start your business, Promptcrafted? And then led you to going off and, leaving Scenario to go all the way, do this as your main business?
Yeah, so before I worked at Scenario, I actually already had Prompt Craft. So this business I started back in 2022, back when I first started training models. Um, and there's been a lot of exploration since then, a lot of growth. Uh, I decided to jump back into the business because there's a lot of projects I want to do that I wasn't really able to do, didn't have the time to do before. Like I one big goal that I have right now is to make a short film. My business partner and I have been working on this sort of short animation film together. And I also found that, the benefit of working in a startup and like an app is that you have this huge team of people that are able, or not huge, but like a small team of people that are able to like work together to build tools, and it's really dynamic. And I love that. But it does also kind of limit you to the tools that you have available in that ecosystem. And I was finding, the space is moving so quickly. I really wanted to be able to be a little more at the very, cutting edge of it, like using Comfy and implementing nodes that day and trying out tools for new workflows. So that was something that was really important to me, and I was really excited to be able to do that again, and it's been great. I mean, I we have like almost a full client booking. We're working with different companies to like, for example, I'm helping make tutorials for Glyph, which is an awesome app that I'm super excited about. Been working with some other startups around like some of their internal workflows and trying to figure out the best ways to build like little AI engines in their internal workflows. So there's these great opportunities right now. It's been I've worked freelance for a very long time, and I've never been in a situation like this where it's just everyone is excited and people just reach out and they're like, "Do you want to work together?" And it's like, "Yeah, okay, let's talk about it." Like, it's I've never been in a situation like that before. It's a really incredible time.
Well, do you have like different types of what kind of things are they is it training models and how when you say that you're with workflows, generative AI workflows, what do you mean? Like what would that look like to someone who doesn't know?
Sure. So a lot of my job is not I do train models for a lot of clients, but a lot of my job is then figuring out how to make AI work in a way that's actually practical for their tools. And I think especially for those who aren't like building apps necessarily, but are more in the like their day-to-day, maybe they're new to it, maybe they're exploring Gen AI for the first time, maybe they're coming from just an art background, shouldn't say just, but like primarily an art
Right.
background, that type of thing. They might not see how without the right guidance, AI can fall really flat, um, in, like, ready for production,
Okay.
situations, and it actually takes a lot of work and nuance to develop things to the point like, to take a workflow, for example, and say, "Okay, I see this workflow, and I want to make it scale and work for my use case in a way that I can actually really depend on it." Like the difference between seeing what people are posting on Twitter and then actually building an app around it or like implementing it in a game or using it for an animation, it's huge difference. Frankly, I've spent more time hand illustrating in the last month than I've had in my entire like late 20s, like,
Wow.
because there's so many components to how AI functions in an actual practical workflow. It really needs a human being, especially when you're setting up AI systems that, you really need to understand a lot of different pieces, and you need to I wouldn't have been able to do half the work that I did in the last month if I didn't know how to draw. Like, it would have
Really?
been impossible. I would not like, I didn't draw anything exciting. I drew, like, little shapes, but I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Wow. And that's just well, the types of clients that you're working with, are they more like what sector are they in?
So we have some clients in the gaming sector, and we also have some clients in the animation sector, like animation for like traditional filmmaking. And then we've worked quite a bit, and we continue to talk to and work with startups in actually the Gen AI space that are adding new tools to their playbooks.
Do you work with other things such as like voice or audio too, or is it
A
strictly
little bit of my business partner, Timothy, his background's actually in, audio production, so he has a foot in that, but I don't do as much with it myself, but I know he's been playing around with that, tinkering with it.
so inspirational? What's the advice that you would give people who are thinking of taking the next step and just making this into their career, their work, what they're doing?
Yeah, there's I have a few pieces of advice. One of the big ones is, what are you really good at? Like, what are you already good at? What are you excited about? It doesn't have to be like what you do for work. Like, what are you actually good at? What do you understand better than most people? Um, Chances are someone needs AI to help them with something related to that. And they're not going to be able to because they don't understand how it works as well as you do. And so the AI might give them an answer. Maybe it's an LLM, maybe it's an image generation model. it's probably not going to be as good as they'd like it to be because it actually needs someone who really understands the context of what it's generating in. AI doesn't have any concept of context. It exists in this void space. So like it needs a human being to guide it through the contextual elements. Um the other thing is develop like especially in generative AI for images or video, uh spend time developing taste. Like, I don't know how to put it any
Yeah.
in a nice way necessarily, but, like, it takes time of consuming media and thinking about what you like. Taste is different for everyone. There's nothing like there's lowbrow art, there's highbrow art, etc. There has to be an art style that you really like, but you need to have a reason why you like it. Like it should be informed. If you can't say I like this because X, then you're going to struggle to say something with your art,
Wow.
and people get excited about and interested in people who know how to use generative AI in a way that's intentional. Like that's what most people are looking for. That's what most people want to hire right now that I'm seeing is people who understand generative AI in a very intentional way and have a perspective. And then the last thing is share your work. A lot of people don't share their workflows. Sometimes I don't because I just don't have the time to put it all together. But anything that you have the time to share that isn't like a huge amount of labor for you, don't hoard it because something new is going to come along and it'll be better or it'll solve the problem that you solved or whatever. Keep this space is very supportive and people reward people for being communicative about what they're working on and sharing what they can.
That's great advice too, especially from when we started back in 2022 and early 2023, people not sharing much. And it is funny because everything is moving so quickly.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant or it's not as important as something else very
And
fast. So
there is a flip side to it, which is um share your work, but again, if it's like sometimes there's unrealistic expectations around sharing work too. Like I definitely get people who are like, "Can you explain exactly how you did this?" And oftentimes I'm like, that would take so much to actually explain because it's not just about what I did here. You will not be able to replicate this step by step. It's about you understanding why I made the decisions I made, and that's a much different thing, so I do wanna put that out there that sometimes it's not possible to share your work,
yeah.
but when it is, when you can share, like, a if you use Comfy UI, if you can share a workflow, like, you can export a JSON file, or if you use Midjourney, if you share your SREF code, like, those are things that people really value, and especially if it doesn't take a lot of energy.
You told me once that it's when like working with different collaboration or clients, it's not about what you're doing right then. It's what the like for as far as being compensated. It's about all the experience that you have, the background, the all the hours you put into learning that, and then your experience with working with it over and over. So that would also be a good reason why, even if you share the workflow, people aren't going to be able to necessarily just replicate everything you did because all the time you put into that, they don't know that backstory, all the, different types of images you were going through or the idea that you had to begin with. You can't necessarily convey that, but your experience it'll show through.
Yeah, and honestly, like that's a great point. I actually had a great conversation with a potential client recently who point blank said like, "Hey, I don't care if you figure out this problem tonight and or tomorrow tell me I know how to do this. Here's the entire workflow." He's like, I would I would expect you to charge the same amount as if it took you a month to do because I understand that it's not about the time it takes you to do this work. It's about the value that led to that time. And definitely don't undervalue yourself in this space. There's very few experts. There's very few people who not just understand how to use the technology, but understand how to use it in a dynamic way that adds value to a process and that can be scaled. And if you're one of those people who even if it's just for a small thing, if it's not like a huge thing, even if it's just one workflow, don't undervalue it. Like make sure that you know your value.
That's a good point, and I hope that more people that we can get more information around that, and people even sharing that their experiences working in this space too. Well, I will
Yeah.
hurry up here, and I do have a quick section that is called this or that. And I'm
Sure.
going to ask you 10 rapid fire questions, and there are two choices. You just pick one or the other. Okay.
Okay,
So,
sounds good.
first one is, are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl, definitely.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee. I'm American.
Yeah. Beach or mountains?
Uh, beach.
Skydiving or scuba diving?
Scuba diving.
Sci fi or fantasy?
Ooh, that's a really tough one. I guess fantasy. I love D&D.
Okay. Strict schedule or go with the flow?
Definitely go with the flow.
Pencil or pen?
Pen.
Oh, I would have thought you would say pencil, but
I'm left-handed, and so pencils actually leave, like, graphite all over me.
oh, okay. Well, I never thought about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Breakfast or dinner?
Dinner.
Movie or book?
I That's tough. M Book, but I like audiobooks better these days because 'cause I'm so busy.
Okay. Introvert or extrovert?
I'm definitely an introvert, but I think people think I'm an extrovert because I can talk a lot.
I can see that. I can understand. Because I am an introvert too. but well, thank you so much. And
Yeah,
I
thank
just
you.
want to ask, like, where can people can find you on a bunch of different places? What would you like to? Where would you direct them to?
Yeah, I would say that my I think X is, like, where I keep things the most updated. If you wanna actually know what I'm doing, my X account is probably it's at Araminta_K, and then I have my bento in that as which has links to everything. I have a lot of things going on, and I think X is where I just keep things the most up to date.
Okay, and I live there too, so I'm so glad that you're here. And I appreciate you coming so much and look forward to seeing what you do next. And I hope that the listeners, can take something from this because it's a great conversation and you've had such a unique experience. And I just really appreciate your perspective and just telling us how you got to this point. And it's such a pleasure to know you. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you so much. I really appreciate you as well, and you're really a voice in the community, so I
Oh,
really appreciate everything you've been doing in the
thank
last few
you.
years.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I'm new here, and people like you made me feel comfortable back when I was just getting into generative AI. So, thank you
Nice.
so much for being a mentor.
Well, thank you.
Well, until next time, thank you for listening to Intelliverse.